to the latest episode of Surgeons' Lives. I'm your host, John Monson. My guest today is an old colleague of mine from the University of Rochester Medical Center in upstate New York. Mike Stoner is a professor of surgery and the chief of the Division of Vascular Surgery. Mike is an upstate New Yorker, being born in Syracuse and doing his undergrad and medical school training in Buffalo before residency in the Medical College of Virginia. He did a vascular fellowship at MGH in Boston before his first faculty job at East Carolina University in North Carolina. He was 8 years there, longer than he thought, before moving to his current position at the University of Rochester. His career has seen a total transformation of vascular surgery, from big open operations to finding a map around the vascular tree with endovascular techniques and various ways of delivering molecular challenges and therapies throughout the body. We discuss all of this in the conversation today, as well as his struggles with golf and his other interests in life. Please like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps, and send comments. But without further ado, let's go over and meet Dr. Mike Stoner. I'm John Monson, and this is Surgeons' Lives. Hey, Mike.
Hey, John. It's good to see you.
And you, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for asking me to partake in this project. It's really exciting. I've done half a dozen of your podcasts now.
Well, I'm not sure I'll go so far as to say it's exciting, but it's enjoyable anyway. And it's been fun over the last couple of years talking to people and seeing that, seeing what's under the hood, if you like.
Yeah. Actually, the interesting part is the commonality. Both the differences, but then the commonality that you have with different surgeons. It's the fellowship and the fraternity and whatever that you feel anytime you meet a surgeon from anywhere in the world. That we all have the shared experience and way of looking at life a lot of times. So it's really cool.
People come at it from different directions and often end up at the same destination. In some respects. So, well, thank you anyway for taking some time out of your day. As you will know from seeing some of the podcasts, I always ask people to just tell the audience a little bit of a starter potted history of life, and starting with the words "I was born in." So I'll throw it over to you.
All right. Well, so I was born in 1970. I was born in Syracuse, New York, which is near where I am now in Rochester. My father at that time was a postdoctoral student in zoology at Syracuse University. He was doing his, a PhD student. His postdoc was at the NIH. He was a PhD student there. My mom was a school teacher. I was born very premature at that time. And I had actually a twin that expired shortly after birth. And I had hyaline membrane disease of the lung.
Oh gosh!
Syracuse was interesting because, as you probably know, for those the surfactant that was created, a lot of that work was largely done in Buffalo at the Children's Hospital in Buffalo. Because of the regional nature of it, I was one of the first babies in Syracuse at that time to get surfactant. Because the neonatologist, the nascent specialty that it was at that time, obviously had regional connections with the people in Buffalo. And I don't know if I was the first, but I was told by my mom and my dad that I was one of the early kind of children who got surfactant and whose life was saved by surfactant, And so, Syracuse was a brief time. Then, like I said, my father was a PhD of comparative amphibian physiologist is what he did. And largely what that meant is he studied ion transport in the collecting tubules of amphibians. They went from brackish water to salt water to fresh water. And he went and did a postdoctoral studies at the NIH in the laboratory that originally described loop diuretics. And then my father eventually, we lived in Bethesda, Maryland at that time, and I spent my early childhood there. And then we moved back to Syracuse, where he was on staff at the medical school in the Department of Physiology. And he spent his entire career there. So I grew up largely in Syracuse, a little kid in Bethesda, and then largely in Syracuse. And
Interesting that the I think he's retired from the position now, but the former CEO of the medical center in Rochester, Steve Goldstein, his original training was a doctoral in frog embryology.
because you can do anything with frog zoology, right? Including running a multi-billion-dollar healthcare enterprise. Yeah,
exactly.
He always you and I both met Steve. I think this now explains a lot. But yeah,
exactly. He always tells a great story about sitting in a board meeting in one of his earliest healthcare experiences as a very young embryonic executive sitting beside some guy, and here he was trained in frog embryology and now moving into healthcare, and this guy beside him said, well, I can give you a little bit of a stock tip, and he went home and said this to his wife, who said, what are you, crazy? We don't have any spare money to put $5,000 into some random dude. And the random dude he was sitting beside was Warren Buffett. And some
advice would be well heeded, yeah. The Oracle of Omaha, yeah.
Exactly.
Oh,
so did you? I mean, you obviously, from the background, there was a sort of a medical-ish bent, etc. But what was the decision or the motivation to become a doctor and/or a surgeon?
Well, I'll tell you. So my father was my childhood idol. He himself was the son of a coal miner in Pennsylvania, right? And so
Wow.
I saw as he was always this guy tinkering and fixing things, helping neighbors, all that sort of thing, and a PhD in physiology. So I went to school originally as a biologist, as a biology major, and at the University of Buffalo. And frankly, and obviously I was looking at my father as an archetype and just sort of following him a little bit. And it was really this in the biological sciences pathway that got me into medicine, really because you're around a bunch of other pre-med students and you start realizing why they're there, what their motivation is. And early in college, I decided to volunteer in the hospital. It was the Erie County Medical Center, which is your teaching hospital at the med school. I was an undergrad at the time. And I didn't know where to volunteer. I was going to push people around like an orderly or what I was going to do. And they had these choices of where you could volunteer. And I chose up the operating room. And so I volunteered in the operating room. And it's strange. So the task they had assigned me was to work in sterile processing. And so maybe they were short of sterile processing people, I don't know. And so they'd have the trays, the surgical trays, to make up these trays. And it was actually not a hard task for someone who's, science minded, et cetera. You count the number of Wheatlanders and put them in the tray, and it's a fun task. You make them all neat and straight, and you send them off to be sterilized. And they would ask me to do these 10 trays, and I was going to be there for 3 hours. I could get the 10 trays done in an hour. So then, because I had scrubs on and an idea, I would just wander around the operating rooms. But eventually people learn your name and they know there's this guy that keeps coming in and looking over everyone's shoulder. And I was amazed at surgery. And I was amazed in the fact, the first thing I remember going home and telling my college girlfriend at the time that this is going to sound funny. I said, I had no idea that you could actually open up someone and cut out the colon and then sew it back together and it would be okay. Right. And I know that sounds crazy to say that, but I'm a college, freshman or sophomore
Yeah.
at the time. It was mind-boggling that you could do this to the human body, and it worked out more often than not,
Yes.
right?
Well, it's
And it
still
just
more often than not, but not always.
oh yeah, as we both know, we spend most of our life talking about the knots,
Yeah,
you know.
exactly.
So it was just, so to me, it was just this amazing thing. Surgery was this just mind-boggling thing to me early on that, like I said, that the human anatomy and the physiology was capable of recovering from that, and that somehow we, over the past hundreds or even thousands of years, had figured this out. You
Yeah.
know, I just looked at it in almost a philosophical way that it was just, um, uh, this was my future.
So you jumped, therefore, to medical school, and I mean, your training and everything was, your life career, if you like, has moved 100 miles up the road. But in terms of, your prior to joining Rochester, you're sitting in Syracuse. What happened then?
Yeah. So upstate New York, I went to college at Buffalo, so
Yeah.
100 and something miles down the road. And then decided I was going to move out of biology and get my MD. I stayed there for medical school as well, so I spent 8 years in Buffalo. Parenthetically, it's something I perceived as the hard conversation in my life is when I told my father I was going to become an MD and not a PhD.
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, it's too bad you're not going to be a real doctor," is what he told me. you know, but he was very proud of my decision. Still, and I had a translational science lab even early in my career, so we always enjoyed talking about science. But yeah, I stayed in Buffalo and really with an open mind, although I was enthralled with surgery at medical school, explored different career options as I kind of navigated through the different clinical rotations and tried to find my way.
Surgery, and vascular surgery then is, of course, very different to vascular surgery now. Uh, I mean, I recall that I actually did a vascular fellowship. Um, um, you know, I was training, not because I wanted to do vascular surgery, but because I liked the discipline of the surgery. Vascular surgeons who finish an operation by saying it'll do, don't usually do very well. They're usually back that night. So I wanted to do it for that discipline. But when I did my vascular fellowship, there was literally no such thing as endovascular. And now, the choice in vascular surgery is, which element of open surgery, might you consider specializing in or whatever. And, your vascular career has really, straddled that time frame. As how have you found that in terms of, originally you were in awe over people making maximally invasive incisions and removing organs, and now you're playing with guide wires and C-arms.
It's interesting, and if you step back and even think about your specialty, right? And think about there's few examples in surgery where minimal access surgery does not become the preferred way of fixing something. And essentially, scientific ingenuity, industrial, medical complex, whatever you want to say, works out the problems unless it's really just a bad idea, right?
Yeah.
And so, and you're right. I lived through that. And when I'll tell you, I did my surgical residency. It was at the Medical College of Virginia, Richmond, right? At the beginning of that time of that 7-year residency, endovascular surgery was a trip to the radiologist suite
Yeah.
and the angiogram and maybe an iliac stent, right?
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
been done by the radiologist who called the surgeon on the table and said, "Is it, would you like us to proceed with a
Yeah.
stent of
Mhm.
common iliac artery?" I'm sure you went through the same, same kind of thing. Um, by the end of that residency training point over the 7-year time period, endovascular aneurysm repair was a commercially viable endeavor. It was held for really the most high risk patients. So we really were using strict physiologic criteria. It was borderline The Walking Dead getting an aneurysm repair, right? And I actually, with that juncture, I'll be honest with you, I wasn't sure it was going to catch on by even my fourth
Yep.
clinical year of my residency. And you probably saw this in the hospitals you were at that time. The operations took 4 or 5 hours, and they ended with a conversion to open, right? And
Yeah.
and it was just, and the patients, and it was train wreck patients and all that. And then over a very short period of time in my fellowship, which was in Boston, that industrial side of it kicked in, where there were suddenly multiple viable, commercially available options to fix aneurysms. And the important thing that happened in vascular surgery is vascular surgeons learned how to do the endovascular procedures concurrent with that
Yeah.
industrial rollout. And so there was this really interesting time, and it's really right before I started my fellowship, where some key vascular surgeons trained themselves in endovascular surgery, largely at the Cleveland Clinic is where they went. Trained by a bunch of old Rochester guys at the Cleveland Clinic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And over a real short period, it was like Ken Oriole and like Tim Shooter and Roy Greenberg uh, um, and others, many others, all of whom kind of crossed paths at Rochester, quickly trained a few dozen vascular surgeons at Cleveland, who then went out in an apostolic way and trained the rest of the country in how to do aneurysm repairs, endovascular.
Yeah. No.
So it's really crazy. It changed in the for me like a 4-year period of me saying, I don't know if this is going to catch on, to
Yeah. And
this is a,
and the other thing, of course, that happened then, and I'm just guessing, a guesstimate, it took about a decade, but there was about a decade which it centered on a turf war. It was the big issues. And indeed, going back to Steve Goldstein, I remember Steve Goldstein saying to me one day, you know, this is crazy. We can't be having two entirely separate endovascular suites because these two groups of people can't talk. It just makes no financial sense. And there was, as I said, roughly a 10-year period of time. There's still a little bit of it on the fringes at the moment, with the carotids and one thing or another. But that turf war was very unique to vascular surgery. It wasn't really happening in GI surgery, and there was a 5-minute period where, somebody thought that GI docs would be doing lap choles, because they could, et cetera, et cetera. But none of it ever did, But in vascular, you suddenly had, the vascular surgeons, the cardiologists, the radiologists, all trying to work out, standing in the room looking at each other, et cetera. What was your experience of that?
it's all politics are local, right?
Hmm.
And so I think that these are site specific in how these worked. I mean, I would say my early time at Mass General where I trained, it was incredible turf war, right? And we would posture at these multidisciplinary conferences, right? And lots of chest thumping took place, and we would make sure we showed up 2 minutes late and left 3 minutes early to show we were more important than the other people in that
Yeah,
room.
yeah,
Um, but there was a lot of posturing early on, and I think that's because of some uncertainty around who would have a future role in this process, who would curry the favor of this nascent industry that was being developed, right? And so there's a lot of devices and things on the
yeah.
horizon. My first job, I was in North Carolina. My first job at East Carolina University, so rural North Carolina. large hospital. It's one of the, it still is to this day, one of the largest hospitals in the US there. And it was a pretty intense turf war that I would tell you was over ego, not volume. I remember in the middle of the stroke belt of North Carolina, where you couldn't devise a better laboratory to create atherosclerosis, and there were more cases than you would ever need. But there was a lot of turf war over it, and it really, um, you know, early on, I think that was just people trying to figure out where their role was in this revolution that was really taking place in terms of this minimal
Yeah.
access vascular surgery. And truly, like myself as a vascular surgeon who was trained in endovascular, I spent the early part of my academic career really as a slightly an endovascular naysayer. Although I practiced it, I published heavily on the patency of open, the superior success rate long term of open reconstructions, the cost benefits, the value benefits. And honestly, I had to spin through that academic cycle for 5 to 8 years until I started to write more about endovascular techniques and superiority and all that sort of thing. So I was actually one of those, I was one of those guys up there beating down the endovascular hubris.
Yeah, it's interesting. And of course, some of it, as you say, was ego, some of it was, who was better, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, as with most surgeons, the commonality was money as well, because, most surgeons, I've always said for years, have this synaptic issue that when somebody else says, I can do that, they go from hearing the other person can do that to thinking, my God, I'm going to have to sell the house and take the kids out of school, and you go, wait a minute. But it takes a nanosecond for them to go there, and it colors every aspect of the debate at that point, because, it's, and of course, nobody says, in the conversation, this I'm taking this position because I want my money. They always have some contrived reason why, etc. So
there's some kind of funny. I don't know though. I don't want to do the line of misjustice, but there is some Joe Fisher line around that. You probably know the line. It's something about how to motivate surgeons, and I think it's like money, dinero, and anything that stands for the first two. But there is some kind of Joe Fisher line. I don't know the whole line, but you know what I'm getting.
I do. So I sometimes ask people this at the end of a conversation. So, just in my career time, vascular surgery, I when I was a resident, they were still doing translumbar aortograms.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I always remember this because the radiologist called me up one day, furious that the intern had consented the patient for a TLA and had written down total leg amputation. And he was furious about this, and he was calling me up to shout at me. I was the chief resident, and I said to him, well, okay, fair enough. I said, but, I would point out that the patient actually signed it. But we went from, taking a needle and shoving it in your back and hoping you would hit the aorta to, a decent percentage. And I've never actually asked a vascular surgeon this, but, you can tell me what percentage of your time now is endovascular. But my question is, what do you think the next big thing in vascular surgery is going to be? And I should preface that by saying, for things like cancer and GI and stuff like that, the answer always centers around some form of molecular medicine. It's a targeted chemotherapy, if you like, immunotherapy, or preventative biologics and one thing or another. But in vascular surgery, what do you think you've had one massive thing, endovascular. What's the next big thing, do you think?
I think it'll be biologics in the
Yeah.
same way. I think it'll be biologic, but I think I'll tell you about a clinical trial that we're in as an illustrative point to that. But I think it will be local delivery of disease modulating drugs and biologics. So we're in a clinical trial right now, a company called Nectero. It's been in trial in Europe. I think it does have a CE mark right now, or maybe the new MDR process. But basically, small aneurysm trial, biologically delivered compound that's designed to stabilize small aneurysm and causes cross-linking of the connective tissue with the
Mm.
aneurysm. So we're randomized patients in this trial. They're taken to an awake procedure where a balloon is inflated in the infrarenal aorta, a low pressure balloon that molds out to the nooks and crannies of everything. And over a time period of 10 to 15 minutes, the drug is eluted through the surface of the balloon out into the aorta. And thus far, it does seem to modulate aortic growth rates. It does seem to, decrease sac expansion of the aneurysm. Now, I think the unimportant part is the drug of that. I think the important part is the local delivery of a compound designed to modify
Yeah.
the disease process. And I think we've had that a little bit through things like anti-proliferative, paclitaxel-eluting stents and
Yep.
sirolimus-eluting balloons, etc. But now this is the beginning of a preclinically significant disease process, small aneurysm, that has a limited risk to the patient. And they're trying to modify that process. So then if you start building on that and you look at, can you deliver locally, because that's what we're experts as surgeons, or systemically, but locally deliver without systemic side effects, therapeutic agents to modify disease process, then why could that not be done for peripheral arterial disease in the preclinical stage? Your ABI is 0.9, you're doing okay, you have some plaque in your leg. Could
Yeah.
the next version of that, be delivery of that local drug delivery? So I think it's going to be these biologic deliveries. We've tried it. We've been doing it for a while. We've tried VEGF, vectors down the leg to try to
Yeah.
create, neovascularization, et cetera. But I think that this trial now because I think the exciting part is the device, not the drug. Again, we have something that works, that delivers a drug, and it sticks in the aorta, and you take the balloon out, and that stuff is still stuck in the aorta. And I think that's the exciting future.
I guess also, if you were imagining the step before that is to say, in the same way that there was a brief moment where the suggestion was that people should take the magic pill that contained a statin and an aspirin and everything in together and take it, as a preventative issue. But I guess the same thing, has that twinkle in your eye that, yes, now you can deliver it to the aneurysm, but what about delivering it to the 20-year-old as a tablet and stopping the whole thing happening in the first place?
Right, right. And I think that what we bring to it as surgeons, right, is we understand the disease process and the longitudinal nature of the disease process. But the part I like about it, being involved as a surgeon, is this endovascular technique you asked me about. What it gave us was the arterial tree as a highway to the body, to driving,
Sure. Yeah.
so you could drive therapy wherever you want in the body now.
Yeah.
So without the systemic effects of, whatever the connective tissue problems you get from statins and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
So I think so I do think that will be the future in vascular surgery. I mean, there's all these other things just like there's tissue engineered blood vessels, that's the thing. I think we're going to move earlier in the disease phase and modify it before they need, bypass or reconstruction.
I've asked surgeons of multiple different specialties the same question, and they always give me the same answer, probably correctly. One day I'm going to ask a surgeon that gives me the opposite answer, but do you think there's a future for the next generation, not you, but the next generation in being a vascular surgeon, being a colorectal surgeon, being an upper GI surgeon? I mean, some disease, peptic ulcer disease disappeared, gone. I think in the next 25 years or so, much colon cancer, rectal cancer will be managed medically, et cetera, et cetera. You're already seeing that, the use of an omnitract is less required in vascular surgery. So, what's your advice to the medical student who says, I'm kind of interested in this vascular stuff? Or would it be the medical student's son or daughter that is the one that you're really talking about?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, right? And actually, the joke I made a long time ago when it looks like I kept writing these papers that statin works, I said, "Ooh, good thing I'm just writing these papers now. I guess I'll be okay, when I'm old man retired, right?" But if you look at it, like if you step back, I remember training in surgery, and there was told that there were four indications for any operation. All right, that's infection, cancer, obstruction, bleeding, or lack thereof. And
Yeah.
if you say if those four things drive need for any kind of therapy we provide, certainly you can say it's a obstructive cancers, massive ischemic events, trauma, et cetera. Surgery will exist forever, right?
Yeah.
There's not going to be a statin that makes you not get shot, shot in the abdomen.
Sure. Yeah.
Now, in terms of vascular surgery, I think that obviously we will still have all those sort of events. I think that the great thing is the people that right before I trained, that I mentioned earlier, who went around the country and they trained how to do endovascular therapy, they ensured the relevance of future vascular surgeons because now the phrase I said 5 minutes ago is that we can look at the vascular tree as a highway to deliver therapeutics. And by its nature, most places, vascular surgeons are still looked at as the comprehensive expert of even just delivery of interpreting, delivering those catheters, delivering those therapies around the body. Yes, there's radiologists doing Y90, like all those kind of things, but it's something that we've strongly kept in our wheelhouse. And I'm grateful for that because otherwise I wouldn't say that vascular surgery wouldn't exist, but we wouldn't have the relevance that we have today in the space. It would be run by other specialists. And there are certainly jurisdictions and countries where that is the case, where there are other specialties kind of forging the future of vascular care. Certainly in the US and most of Western Europe, it's the way it is.
Yeah. I always, think back to, I'm old enough, and I think you're probably old enough too, to remember Star Trek, where, the doc, Bones, used to just turn up and wave a little wand over something that would have a little light and buzz, and it would be fixed, and, it was magic, etc. I have to tell you that, that's what I think is going to happen in the sense that, as you just pointed out very eloquently, that, endovascular has allowed access to everything inside the body, a pathway through the vasculature to almost every organ. The next step has to be able to do that without going inside the body, and to deliver it outside. We already do it with various forms, et cetera, et cetera. So it'll be interesting to see. We it is very interesting to see how the pace of change is. It's much more of a vertical line than it used to be. So let me just pivot and say, so there you are in MGH. I won't even acknowledge its other name, of course. But what was your ambition when you were there, and compare that to your ambition now?
Um, I guess ambition as in what I saw as my goal to accomplish at that
Yeah,
time.
what did you want to be, and what did
Okay.
you think was, this is what I have to do, and now look at you, what is it that you have to do?
That's when I was at Mass General, I knew I wanted to be an academic surgeon at that time. And that's your strong mentors in my surgical residency, strong mentors in the fellowship training program. In fact, what I knew I wanted to create at that time was a bibliography and experience around carotid disease. I really enjoyed carotid disease. I wrote a couple key papers during that time with mentors at the MGH. So I remember sitting with other fellows saying, how are you going to, where's your career? How are you going to divvy this up? And I said, I want to do all the carotid papers. All right, you do all the aortic papers. We sort of, who would get assigned to what pet project of the different faculty, Um, and certainly then I first, I got out at MGH, and my first faculty job was at East Carolina University, and I stumbled into that job by a friend of mine who was a fellow a few years in front of me at MGH, and he also was a resident with me in Virginia before, so we knew each other, lifelong friends. And he actually had gone to medical school at East Carolina, and he knew they were looking for a vascular surgeon there. And he told me, hey, you should just check this job out. You may not have heard about the place, but it's got an insane clinical volume, right? And I went down and met the surgeons there, and they were just great people. And I knew I wanted to learn from these high volume surgeons as the finishing school that you need after fellowship. But the part what that afforded me, like I said, I wanted to develop an early kind of career trajectory around cerebral vascular disease and just occlusive vascular disease overall. I said flippantly that it was a great atherosclerotic laboratory, and it really was. There were so many patients there with so much disease processes. I was able to quickly turn that into academic productivity. And the great part about the serendipity of the whole thing was sort of I stumbled into this high volume practice quickly with really good clinical mentor surgeons that frankly weren't doing a lot of research, but that was the vacuum I was able to step into. So I was able to take this thing where there was just, you could build an internal database with thousands of patients quickly about any disease process you wanted. And then same thing, there was sort of a bunch of surgical residents sitting around looking for that next step. They themselves looking to develop a bibliography on their own that could become your your unpaid labor that populates said database. And it really was just a great that kind of first 5 years was an explosive 5 years for me in terms of academic and clinical production, just because of being in an environment that was likely under-doctored, like under-resourced. So we had more cases than you could imagine.
Did you?
A bunch of surgical residents hungry to work and to write papers,
Was it always going to be a stepping stone, or did that just happen?
That's what I declared it to my to my wife when we moved there from Boston. And it's funny, It's Greenville, North Carolina. It's probably twice the size now of what it was. But when I went there, it was a one airport gate town, right?
Yeah.
And the funny thing I can remember is I go there as second interview. I'm a fellow. I'm just excited that anybody would want to give me a job, honestly. Right? And you get a free dinner out of it. And I bring my wife there. And I remember we went through Logan Airport in Boston. You drive in the Big Dig. It's underground. It's like a Star Trek episode in your car. And we go there. We get off, and we're in this one gate airport. And all you can see is a grain silo next to it. And my wife says, "I guess we're not in frickin' Boston anymore." Right? And I thought, oh, this is going to be a disaster. We should just, hurry up, get the free dinner and get out of here, right? And frankly, that's why I told my wife, I said, this would be a stepping stone. I want to learn this clinical art surgery, and I think your first faculty job, your first position, is really the next fellowship. I mean, you really, you know what I mean? Like you the first time you do a carotid by yourself or any operation for real by yourself, a few of your cardiac myocytes died during that case, more of yours than the patient's, but what happened was I just developed this great clinical practice, and like other things in life, had young kids. We started raising a family. You have friends with young kids raising a family, and it became one of the best times in my life, both professionally and personally, for that reason, just because of that. Yeah, I'm sure you know what I mean. That trajectory early on when you're starting out and all your kids are friends and you're all working hard and all that, and it really became a great kind of 9 years was the final run of the place. I said was just a stepping stone.
Yeah,
Don't
yeah,
work,
yeah.
be out of here.
And so now you're a decade or so in Rochester, 20 years in. These are rough figures, of
Yeah,
course, 20 years or so in. Um, you know, have you, it's a word that people use, the word legacy, and it's sounds rather sophisticated word, but what is it that you want to leave behind? What does, for me, I realize, that almost everything I've written, is of no interest to anyone, it's either of no interest or it's actually turned out to be completely wrong, so
yeah.
it's not what, it's not what I would consider to be something that I would, want to leave. But what's your mindset in that?
That's first I'll say your point about everything you've written being rubbish, right? The residents will know this. We have a Monday, like every other division in the country, we have a Monday morning indications conference, right? And the residents will present a case. They open their groins to the wolves. So they could be attacked by the faculty, even though they didn't make the decision to do the case. Standard training paradigm.
Yeah.
They'll show some papers to justify the case they're going to do, right? And all I do the entire time is search my CV because I know I wrote a paper on that at one point in time, and I want to just lambast the resident for not quoting my paper from 1997, right? Because it's rubbish now. But I think here's the thing I think about it. Like if I look at my legacy now, I don't think it's not those papers. The part about this, about why we do what we do, at least I'm not projecting on you, but but why I do what I do in academic vascular surgery is the success of those trainees over time, right? And is that we made a lasting impact on how they will treat vascular disease in the future. And what I really hope that I've done here in Rochester, which is something I take a lot of pride in, is have I set up a system here of a just culture, of a thriving culture that people can be happy and proud to work at. And that's something that takes some time to get into that mindset. And when I came here, it was a bit of like buying a house on foreclosure when I got here for vascular. The details, and we've done well. And the part that I would say now, I guess, to get back to my ambition, because you opened this line of conversation about my ambition. My ambition now is to make sure that I've set up a thriving culture that allows the success of all those around me, right? And that's something that takes a little bit of maturity and time, because early on in your career, and I think your career probably goes through stages. There's a stage I had at the beginning of East Carolina, which is like I want to find the blood vessel and not kill the patient. That's what Mike Rotundo told me my goal. Find the vessel, don't kill the patient. And that's the line I say to most of the junior faculty. And then you get a few years into it and you get proficient and really good at operating. And then it takes some time. The next step is really making sure that you step out of that spotlight and you set up a system to allow others to thrive in that spotlight, and that you're behind the scenes making sure that things are working right, trying to solve problems, but not taking away the clinical spotlight, the research spotlight, et cetera. And I'm sort of shifting into that role in the last several years as we increased our size and volume and so forth. So my legacy really is that. Did I set up in an environment that's a prosperous environment for everyone?
Yeah, and to some extent, it's you're building a program where they don't need you,
Right. Yeah.
If I've always been a believer that the strongest programs are the ones that survive when, a significant figure leaves, etc. So pivoting, as you and I discussed leading up to this interview over the last couple of months or so, you were struggling with with a bad neck, and I wasn't struggling with a bad neck until 3.5 weeks ago when I ruptured a disc suddenly, and I had to have an emergency operation to
Oh, wow.
decompress three vertebrae, etc., which I strongly do not recommend, etc., unless it's absolutely necessary. But and the neurosurgeon said to me, I said, well, I was just doing it on an elliptical, nothing. He says nothing to do with the elliptical. He said it's 30 years of bending over operating on people. I see it all the time. Um, um, so you're moving into a phase of your life. What happens when the lights go off at the end of the week? What gives you fun and joy in your life? What
Well,
else is
I
there
mentioned
too?
you, yeah, I mentioned this in the email to you, and I don't know if I can call it joy while I'm doing it, is I've taken up golf,
Yeah,
right? And so I think I actually say we should go golfing so I can feel worse about myself. And during COVID, when there was nothing to do, kind of shortly thereafter, things were still kind of dying out. My wife and I took up golf. Claire doesn't know how to golf, and she said, "Let's learn how to golf together, because we can play this in our old age, right?" And especially guys, every one of us has friends who have a basement full of clubs because they keep buying more clubs because it's going to
yeah,
make them better at golf, even though it
yeah.
probably doesn't make you better at
Of
golf.
course not. Yeah.
It was a piece of cake to make one phone call and get a set of clubs from someone, right? Or they've given up the sport because they can't stand it anymore. Um, and it's so funny. I look at it in retrospect the first, because I'm now 5 years into saying I golf, right? And I really, it's a dangerous sport for a surgeon of our personality disorders, at least mine. You can go down that rabbit hole of YouTubes and perfect getting rid of your slice, where you can tell your wife you'll be right to bed, and it's really going to be 3 in the morning when you go to bed, right? But I've become really kind of enthralled with it because I thought about why I like it so much. And every time you swing, if done right, it's stochastic, non-probabilistic based on the last swing. You can have a bad shot, and if you can do it right, and it's a mental game, like everyone always says, and you can clear your mind and redo it, you can have a great shot, and your emotional score can go from 0 to 10, right?
Sure.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and I get and the interesting thing. So I think that's what I like a lot about it is I play it now for that shot, that hole that you remember on the way home in the car, the hole you birdied, not the one where you lost your ball and all that kind of thing. The hole that you birdied that you could only just do that every time you'd be on the tour. And I enjoy that about it, although it's very frustrating. But I think I liken this to some elements of surgery. To bring it is that I run this complications course with some friends of mine in DC every summer, and it's called Managing Cardiovascular Complications: How to Get Yourself Out of Jail When You
Yeah.
Screwed Something
Yeah.
Up, right? And we go through our tips. Like, I'm 20 years. Here's a thing I last week, and I started effing it up, and I did this, and I saved it. And we show it to all the fellows. And I give a talk on one Saturday morning when I talk about the mental recovery of a major complication. And I
Yeah.
bring it back to golf. I said it's the mental recovery of a golf swing, although a patient problem is a lot worse than a golf problem. But that every time you step back up on the plate and you come back after a bad operation to do a new operation, it's not dependent on the performance of that last operation. That you get to sit there, and the
Yeah.
same with the golf swing, if done right, and if you can, whatever, have a sip of the liquid courage that you need to get out and swing again, or whatever it takes, you get to come up again and kind of redeem yourself every time. And I think that's true with surgery.
I think it's true, and I'm not even sure it's a whole. I think for the amateur bad golfer, it's actually. I've always thought it's just the one shot.
Mhm.
You hit a shot, and nobody else could hit that shot better, just that one, and that's what brings you back. But you mentioned, it's a mental game, and it's always fascinated me. A couple of things fascinated me about top level golf. The top level golfers it's all the 6 inches between their ears that really makes the difference. Number one. And the other thing that I've noticed over the years about top level golfers is that I remember watching the late great Seve Ballesteros on the 15th fairway in the Masters, and he was on the way to winning it again, and he hit a second shot in the water for no reason, and he was never the same again. He was never the same again. I mean, he won the odd tournament and one thing or another, but he just couldn't understand. And that's also a little bit like surgeons as well. You make a mistake that's either it's either a transparent mistake or a mistake that you don't realize you're making. But there is that little symmetry, as that famous, phrase says. You keep them the good surgeons keep them. They never forget them. They never forget those things, and I think that's one of the reasons that they are good surgeons is because they do not forget them, etc. So
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, and I think that, and I think it's a great point. And I think if you're taking this back to surgery, right? And if you look at it, like I said, every golf swing is an independent event. But with surgery, I guess that's when you're not really ready to keep doing it anymore. Where if those events
oh sure, yeah,
mean that you can't get back on the horse, and yeah, you have to be emboldened by your successes and learn it from your failures, right? And sometimes in the thing, just like in golf, like in surgery, things just happen
yeah,
sometimes, right? I mean, it's just things happen. You
yeah,
can have an operation. I mean, because we probably feel the same way too. After sometimes a great swing, it's like a great operation. You've had you come in the morning dreading a tough whatever you're going to do, and you're done at 10, and it came out fantastic.
yeah.
It's just like in the good golf swing, you feel good
Yeah.
walking back up to your office.
No, no, for sure.
You
Okay,
know?
in the last few minutes, let's pivot for some important life things. So, what figure in the world alive today do you admire?
All right. I would say um this is going to be a weird one because I was just talking about him last night with my daughter. Is Lurie, who's the Mayor Lurie of San Francisco. I don't know if you know who this guy is, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And I'll tell you, and I could come up with much more grand characters and all that.
Sure.
But if you say like, who could I have dinner with tonight? It would be him, right?
Fine.
And the reason why, if I look at that, my daughter lives in San Francisco, so I pay attention to what goes on in that city because she moved across the country, and I worry about her safety and all that, like any good father would. And I'm looking at what that guy has done with the city in his short time in this massive turnaround of the city, and he is to me aspirational in his leadership style. He does have a bit of an Instagram mayoralship, but the guy is walking up and down the street. He knows all these small business owners. He's shaking hands and kissing babies all day long, but
Yeah.
not in the way of like a of a old boss, big city old boss
Yeah.
kind of thing. And so, but I look at that guy and I see what he's done with the city and how he's turned things around, and it's from a boots on the ground pragmatic way of leading, and that's how I aspirationally see myself as a leader. And so I see if I could be the mayor of San Francisco, I would probably do just about everything that guy did.
Now,
So,
you said you would if you could choose to have somebody to dinner tonight, that he would be one. And if you could choose somebody from history To be the second guest at dinner, who would it be?
Well, I'd load up on liquor and invite Winston Churchill,
It
right?
would-
But I'd have to load up on whiskey and that the god awful champagne he liked to drink.
It's, a-
Uh,
it's amazing the number of surgeons that have said Winston Churchill to me. It's extraordinary.
well,
Um,
he's a surgeon, right? He has a surgeon's personality, and
yes.
I'm just finishing this Eric Larson book, The Splendid and the Vile, which is the essentially largely taken from his diary during the Blitz. And so I and he's certainly not an aspirational person for many of its places, right? Like I don't know what my LFTs would be like, the fascinating thing about him was that driven by whatever that driving force is, be it ego, the right amount of bravado and serendipity, he did what needed to be done in the UK at that time to get us to the point when the rest of World War II unfolds the way it does.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, a genuine polymath, of course, number one, and a fantastic wartime leader and a catastrophic peacetime leader. It's interesting that, I guess like everyone else. So, what happens when we die?
What happens when we die? We have a spirit, and when we die, and I'm actually an unabashed Catholic, so I believe that we are reunited with God.
Okay, there will be a heaven.
Yes, there will be a heaven, and our purpose in life is to live our life in a way that we are reunited with God.
What talent that you don't have would you like to have?
I can't say golf. I already said that,
No,
right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
I don't. You know what's great about golf is no one's happy with their golf game. I have a terrible handicap, and I can go out with you, and I'm sure you're better than me. We're both going to be pissed off the whole time.
Exactly. Yeah.
I wish I was more. I wish I was a musician. My wife plays piano. My children all sing or play instruments. I was forced to take piano as a kid.
Yeah, me
Every
too.
other
Yeah.
good kid, and I wish I stuck with it. I wish I was more of a musician.
I don't know. It's amazing the number of people that say they wish they could play a musical instrument, and I'm not sure. I mean, there's obvious reasons why that is, but I'm really not sure why people say that. But it's very common. Okay, here's some fast ones now. Favorite food?
Red meat, steak, great for a
Um,
vascular surgeon.
favorite movie?
Um, Shawshank Redemption,
Cats or dogs?
dogs,
Window or aisle?
aisle,
Beer or wine?
beer,
Mac or PC?
Mac.
And one song for the rest of your life,
Stairway to Heaven, Led Zeppelin.
even though you have no idea what it's about.
Actually, there was a great. So I was playing in the kitchen last night, doing the dishes. Yeah.
It's, and even they don't know what it's about. Well, Mike, listen, I want to thank you for taking time to talk. As I always say to people, this won't come out immediately, but it does come out on audio, all the audio platforms, as well as YouTube, etc. It's been a great pleasure catching up, and I really appreciate you taking the time.
All right. Thanks, John. Take care. I hope to see you around.